Hi there, I'm Stephanie, and this is Headlines and Tidbits, the podcast that dusts off the forgotten, the bizarre, and downright unbelievable stories from old newspapers. Each episode has two parts. First, I share a headline that caught my eye, something strange, unsettling, or just too odd to ignore, and uncover the story behind it, who it involved, what happened, and why it still matters. Then comes the tidbits, the little gems that never made the history books, scandalous divorce notices, odd ads, and quirky local stories that reveal the world we came from. So settle in, we're about to journey through the pages of the past, one headline at a time. So today's episode is actually going to be a little different. Instead of talking about one headline or story, I'm actually going to go over a bunch of articles I found that talk about haunted houses, ghosts, and all sorts of creepiness because today is our Halloween special. So happy Halloween, everybody out there. I hope you have a safe and fun Halloween. So we're going to start with a story from the Detroit Free Press, and it is dated July 14th, 1907. And the headline reads, "Old Haunted House at Lake Harbor Holds No Inducement to Attract the Timid." So the article starts out quite mysterious. It says, quote, "Englishman married and went to a wooded place for the honeymoon. Bride dies suddenly and an uneasy spirit is thought to linger." So there was this house in a summer resort area called Lake Harbor, and this was in Michigan. And this man from England was touring around the U.S. with his new bride right after the Civil War. So think 1865-ish. And when they landed at Lake Harbor, they fell in love with the area and decided that that's where they would build their home. And they both loved all the fishing and hunting that the area provided for them. And they couldn't get over how beautiful the landscape was with the mountains and the water. And what they really loved about it was the fact that it was not very populated. So the couple ended up building their home and they planned on spending the summer months there. But something went wrong one stormy night. The couple was in their newly built house and the bride was in the kitchen and her husband was in the dining room. And he called out to his wife for something. And when she didn't answer him, he went looking for her in the kitchen. So this is when tragedy struck. There was a swinging door that separated the dining room and the kitchen. So the wife, probably when she found a free moment, headed towards the swinging door to see what her husband wanted. However, this happened to be the exact moment her husband was headed to the kitchen, and they both hit the swinging door at the exact same time. However, he got there a little quicker than her, and the door swung open and struck her. And it struck her apparently so hard that she fell to the floor and died. So, how hard did he push this door? I kind of have to question if something else happened here because, of course, we're only hearing his side of the story. And I really question it because what the husband does next is crazy. First, he actually tries to commit suicide. And when he was not successful, he drug his wife's body down to the basement and burned her body. There's just a lot of really odd steps if this was purely an accident. Why not just go get help? But he later told authorities that he did this because he feared that his wife's relatives would think of him as a murderer. I wonder why he was so worried about that. So now I could not find anything about what happened to the husband. I don't know if he was ever accused of murdering her or if the police believed him that it was an accident. I'm not sure what happened. But let's fast forward to 1907 when this article was actually written. And by this time, the house is haunted by the spirit of this woman. And people talk about how she apparently haunts the halls at night, calling out her husband's name and making really weird noises. In fact, people who have stayed at the house for vacation said that they heard the sound of windows breaking, but when they checked, no windows were broken. Visitors usually would only stay for a short while at the house. They would either pitch a tent outside, or some brave ones would even pitch a tent inside the house. And apparently this got so bad that in 1908, the house was torn down to make room for housing and larger cabins. So like I said, I don't actually know what came of the wife's death or what happened to the husband, but apparently something was going on in that house because it seems like it was pretty haunted. Okay, so now we're going to head over to Nebraska and read about another haunting from 1894. The Omaha Daily Bee put out an article with the headline, "Several Omaha parties changed their minds regarding the existence of ghosts." The article opens up talking about a young man named Ed Smith, who is regarded in the town as being very upstanding. Ed was an accountant who, quote, 7 months ago didn't believe in ghosts, but now has changed his mind. So the article talks about how Ed rented a small cottage with his mother a few months prior to this. But after a few nights of staying in the house, the two started to notice strange sounds during the night. They would awaken by the doorbell in the middle of the night, and the doors would start to rattle as if someone was shaking them. Now, you could probably explain this away by saying that there may have been some kids outside playing tricks, or playing Ding Dong Ditch, or maybe it was a windy night. But other weird things would happen in the house also. They would hear things falling throughout the house, like as if something was being pushed off of a shelf, but when they would check, everything was intact. But the creepiest noise of all would be the groaning they would hear throughout the cottage in the middle of the night. Now, Ed's mother corroborated his story, and she even added how the sounds would happen at the same time every day, 4 a.m. Ed decided one night that he would stay up in the parlor facing the door, but in a position where he could still see the inside of the house. He wanted to see if he could catch a prankster, but he never caught anyone. So after this, Ed decided that he would take the doorbell off of the front door. And this worked because the doorbell ringing ceased for a while. But Ed's mother suspected that this irritated the ghost because she started noticing sounds coming from underneath a rug. So one night she lifted the rug, which was covering the door that led down to the cellar. Ed and his mother examined the cellar, but didn't really find anything mysterious. But after a while, Ed decided that he would put the doorbell back. And the night that he put the doorbell back, he said that the ghost decided to make up for lost time and rang the doorbell aggressively for a few nights. One day after this, a neighbor asked Ed why he and his mother make so much racket at night. And Ed was taken aback and told the neighbors how he thinks a ghost is haunting his house. But this was the last straw for Ed and his mom, and they moved out. Now, this was towards the end of the summer when they moved out, and then a new family moved in. Frank Burham and his wife moved into the cottage at the end of the summer. And the first week they were there, they heard some noises throughout the house, but it quickly stopped after that. So a reporter with the Omaha Daily Bee dubbed this ghost the summer ghost because it only seems to haunt the house in the summer months. And this is how Ed Smith and his mother came to believe in ghosts. Kind of a strange story. Never heard of seasonal ghosts, but I guess you never know. Our next story takes place at a fairground in New Jersey in October of 1888. So one night at the Burlington County Fairgrounds, some guards were walking the grounds to ensure that the racehorses were safe. And one of the men actually saw a white figure roaming around in the nearby trees. At first, he thought it was just the nighttime shadows and the moon making him see movements that were not really there. But then he thought it was one of the racehorses. He thought it was a white horse that got loose and was wandering around. So he called over one of his coworkers to take a look at it. They both noticed that the creature was walking upright. So at this point, they kind of ruled out that it was a horse, and both men started feeling a little uneasy because they couldn't figure out what this white figure floating around in the woods was. So while the men were watching it, it actually turned towards them all of a sudden, walked out of the trees, and headed right at them. Once they saw the figure walk out of the trees, they realized that it was a man wearing white clothes. But as the figure got closer, they started thinking maybe this was more supernatural because the figure more floated than walked. And it actually went right past them towards the horse stables. And as the figure walked past them, they noticed a red line going down the side of this man's/ghost's face. They said it looked like a bleeding wound. So the two men were completely stricken with fear. In fact, a reporter with the local newspaper said, quote, "They could not have uttered a word to save their necks." So the ghost, like I said, was headed to the stables, and these stables had two doors. One door was open and one door was closed. So the ghost, of course, walked straight through the closed door, which frightened the two watching men even more. But the two men, they dug deep down and found some courage to quietly walk over to the stables and see what this ghost was up to. When they got to the stables and peeked through the open door, they saw the ghost pacing up and down in front of the horse stalls. But now, seeing this, the two men started thinking maybe they were being tricked, and this really was a man who was trying to steal a horse. So the two men went and woke up the jockeys, explaining what was going on. And the jockeys, apparently wanting to protect their horses, jumped out of bed and started running toward the stables. And the reporter explained this whole thing as very chaotic. The guards and the jockeys, they were running around the whole area trying to get to the stalls as soon as they could. But when they got to the stalls, the ghost figure was still pacing. It was as if the chaos and all the men running around was not even happening or bothering the ghost. Even the horses were becoming frantic with all the chaos and noise. So all the men decided they would charge into the stables and take the man down. But when they barged into the stables, the ghost was gone, and all that was left was a cold wave of air. And with that, all of the men were completely bewildered and decided they would be extra vigilant the next few nights. And the very next night, the ghost showed back up and repeated the exact same events from the previous night. However, when the men watched the ghost enter the stables, the ghost walked up to one stall instead of pacing. The ghost looked in the stall and shook his head back and forth, then walked out of the back of the barn and was never seen again. So the jockeys speculated that the ghost was a jockey who was killed during a race at the fairgrounds 2 years prior. They thought maybe he was looking for his horse. So if that's true, I guess that probably explains the wound on the face. And I can imagine that that would be a little spooky for those guards and those jockeys, especially walking right through the door. It's like, of course he chooses the closed door and walks right through it, but it's crazy. All right, so now let's go to the state of Connecticut and jump back to the year 1897. The New Haven Register published an article on September 9th, 1897 with the headline, "Is Italian Ghost Caught? Apparition in the House of Giovanni Coroni Captured." The newspaper reported that the Italian colony in Fairhaven was extremely excited, and what they meant was scared over rumors of a ghost living in the house of Giovanni Coroni. But this ghost was said to be huge and extremely strong, and had the uncanny power to become invisible whenever it wanted. Strangely though, the ghost was not haunting the whole house, but just the bedroom of the young son of Giovanni and his wife. And the ghost came out to haunt the young boy at the same time every night. Exactly a half hour after midnight, the ghost would appear in the young boy's room. Now, I couldn't find the name of the son, but this poor boy, he was around 12 years old and was so traumatized from this haunting every night that he ended up losing a lot of weight and was bedridden with sickness. The boy was said to have told the police that the ghost, who also resembles an old witch, told him that she, and he did refer to the ghost as a she, would kill him one night. Then she would kill his family one by one unless the family moved back to Italy. So at this point, it makes you wonder if this ghost just doesn't want anyone living in the house or if something else is going on. So one evening, some family friends, 3 men to be exact, agreed to hide out in the boy's bedroom to see if they could catch the ghost or at least figure out what was going on. They used a barrel, so I'm kind of picturing like a whiskey barrel or a wine barrel, to conceal the light that they brought with them, and they would kind of like hide behind it, which if you think about that, that seems a little dangerous because I'm sure it was like an oil lamp or a candle being 1897, and if this is a wooden barrel, that could be bad, but anyways. So these 3 men hid in the corners of the room and waited. And of course, when it was 12:30, the men heard a strange creaking noise coming from the doorway. The men said they then saw a, quote, pale radiance that had on white robes and had features that looked like a witch entering the room. And when this witchy ghost-looking thing got close to the boy, one of the men let out a shriek and dove at the figure. And the man and the ghost ended up getting in a large fight. The ghost ripped the man's shirt and basically, I guess you could say, won the fight because the ghost escaped out the door. The man later told authorities that he felt like a helpless infant in the arms of the ghost. The ghost eventually threw the man aside and, like I said, ran out the door. So the 3 men, they searched the house but couldn't find the figure again. So the family and the men went to the authorities with this story. And the authorities decided to hide out in the room for themselves. And just like before, the ghost walked into the room around 12:30, but this time the ghost was captured after a really long struggle. So I'm sure by now you've probably figured out that this is not a ghost. It was indeed a human haunting this poor boy. And worst of all, the ghost, quote ghost, was the boy's mother. This is reminding me of a recent Netflix documentary that just came out. It's not good. And so the mother, she confessed to the police that she was in fact the one haunting her son because she desperately wanted to go back to Italy. Her husband, however, didn't want to go back to Italy, so she was hoping that this scheme would convince her husband to take them back to Italy. Keep in mind, we talked about how this little boy ended up losing a lot of weight and was so stressed out and sick over this that he was bedridden. Later on, the family actually came out and made a statement denying that the mother was the ghost, and they still believe a witch is making their son sick. And according to the article, most of the Italian colony believed the family. So, you know, I get it. They don't, like, who wants to believe that? That's not okay. So anyways, I tried to figure out what happened to this family, but didn't find anything. Like I said, the article only really provided the name of the father, so that made researching harder. All right, well, we will be staying on the East Coast for a little while because now we're going to head to Paterson, New Jersey, where all sorts of spookiness broke out in the tenement houses of the local Italian colony. And it started on Easter Sunday in 1901. After Easter dinner, a fight broke out in the house of Pietro Pacilio. And unfortunately, Pietro was shot and killed. Now, his brother Sabato first admitted to the killing, but after a police investigation, it turned out that Pietro's brother-in-law, Tony Galizza, was actually responsible for the murder. Now, for the life of me, I can't figure out why a fight broke out, but regardless, he ended up dying that Easter. He actually died in the kitchen, which will come into play later. About a month later, all the tenants living in the building started reporting some really strange happenings. Pietro's wife, for example, said a couple of weeks after the murder, all of her faucets in her apartment turned on, and she reported seeing her husband's spirit roaming the hallway in her apartment. She ran into a neighbor's apartment and was shouting, "I just saw my husband and he's covered in blood." So the Italians in the apartment building noticed that the kitchen floor where Pietro died was still bloodstained, and some said that this is where his spirit was manifesting. So they all agreed to stay up the next night and see if they could spot Pietro's spirit. They said that they could hear banging noises coming from a room that had nobody in it. And scariest of all, they actually saw Pietro turning on faucets. So the next day, a huge group of Italians said, "We're done, we're out of here," and they moved out of the tenement house. A few Italian families stuck it out for a while, but the ghost seemed to be moving around the whole apartment building now. He was turning on the faucets in everybody's apartment right around 9 p.m., the time he apparently died. And people were reporting that in the abandoned apartments, they heard stuff being thrown against the walls. Eventually, all of the families moved out. And after this, kids would walk by the apartment building and whisper, "Watch out for the dead man." Many people told reporters that they just don't think the spirit will rest until there is justice. Many even speculated that the reason Pietro's ghost turns on the water is to wash the blood away. So, this being the age of article it is, I really wasn't able to find a whole lot of information on what happened, but hopefully Pietro found some peace and his wife found some peace also, and everybody else who lived in that building. My goodness. All right, well, those are our spooky headlines for today, and now we'll get into the tidbit portion of the episode. And the first tidbit is a ghost story that was published in the Denver Post on October 28th, 1931, and I'm just going to read it. So it's titled A Ghost Story by Maxine Darknell, and she is a junior writer, age 15, and she is from Rawlins, Wyoming. So the story goes, it was exactly 12 o'clock. Midnight was the time ghosts were supposed to be seen, wasn't it? What if one were to appear now? Such thoughts sent shivers up and down Jane's spine. Then she heard the door open, ever so softly, and something padded across the room until it stood right by her bed. What could it be? Was it looking at her? Indeed it was. It even jumped upon the bed, and poor, frightened Jane found herself looking into two large green eyes. Meow came from somewhere below the green orbs, and again, meow. Toots, exclaimed Jane. Don't ever frighten me like that again. Here, let me cover you up. That's pretty cute for a 15-year-old girl sending that in. And the next tidbit, it comes from the Midland Daily News out of Michigan and is dated October 11th, 1957. And it's a pennies ad. And I'll post this up on social media, but if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can also see this ad. It says, special one-time buy, just 300 Halloween costumes, $1.44. We make no bones about our skeletons. And it has a group of different Halloween outfits. And that's group number 1. And then group number 2, 77 cents. And it says, they're slick and neat for trick or treat. And it has, I don't know, maybe like a clown and maybe like a Red Riding Hood, but it's pretty cute. And it says, shop thrifty pennies tomorrow. You can't afford not to. And like I said, I'll post that on social media, or if you're watching on YouTube, you've seen the ad. And our last tidbit is from July 30th, 1912, which I know that's not really Halloween season, but it's a ghost story. And this story was posted in the Webster City Freeman out of Iowa. And the headline reads, Ghost Caused Mutiny on Ship. Crew of British convict ship rebels from superstitious fears. Boston, Massachusetts, July 26. With her crew on the verge of mutiny because of superstitious fears, the British convict ship Success, which left Glasson Docks, England, 3 months ago for New York, has been ordered to Boston, where last reported by wireless, the vessel was 70 miles south of Sable Island and is expected here sometime this week. According to dispatches received from Captain John Scott, the crossing of the Atlantic has been one round of weird experiences. Innumerable accidents to masts and rigging, shortage of fresh water and spoiled provisions have been the least of his troubles. The Success carries a crew of 18 men, mostly northern Russians. The men are highly superstitious, and according to reports received here, ghost after ghost has been seen by the members, clinking chains throughout the 'tween decks and in the cell rooms of the old floating prison. So serious has the situation become that the men refuse to sleep or remain below decks for any length of time and will only go beneath hatches in couples or games. So I wonder if they made it to Boston. Hopefully they did. Well, I hope you enjoyed exploring these headlines and tidbits with me, and I hope you come back to listen to more stories from newspapers of the past. Happy Halloween!